Welcome everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept. If you'd like to find out more about the association and membership, you can check out our website. In this session, we welcome Dr. Deissy Martínez Barón for a presentation titled The Role of Social Capital in Agricultural Research for Development. We're delighted that you've agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Deissy. Perhaps you could provide a brief introduction of your background before you get started with your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tristan. I'm very glad to be here with you, and thanks so much for the invitation. My name is Deissy Martínez Barón. I am an economist, but doing my doctoral studies on human geography at the Copenhagen University. And I am also a scientist in the Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT. This is a CGIAR center, which is one of the biggest organizations, global organizations doing agricultural research for development. So I've been working here almost 12 years now. So in this environment of agricultural research for development, and I'm really keen to know what we can do more to actually increase the impact that we do with our research. So that's kind of the main motivation for my research. Good. So should I start? Okay. So yeah, as Tristan was mentioning, so the overall topic of my research is focusing on the role of social capital in scaling agricultural research for development. Today, I'm going to present one of the results of the papers that are already published on this topic, and it is a systematic literature review to unpack the scaling, how scaling of agricultural research innovations for development are being considered into the social capital literature. So the idea is to unpack the literature a little bit more on that. So these are the topics that we are going to review today. So first is setting the context in terms of the scaling. What is the scaling? Perhaps not everyone knows what I'm referring about when I'm talking scaling in the agricultural research for development context. Then the connection with social capital, with the scaling, and what are the results that I got in terms of this systematic literature review, and what are the key messages that we need to take into consideration in order to actually make more explicit use of social capital in the processes of scaling agricultural research for development. So scaling in this context. So we as international research organizations in the agricultural context, we have been always thinking about, okay, so we develop innovations to address the core challenges that we have in humanity in different regions and countries. And we are facing global challenges in the agri-food system, so climate change, food security, sustainable development, that require innovations, use of scientific evidence to address these different challenges that we are facing today. And we have done a lot of that. If you look at the CGIAR, how many different innovations, technologies have been developed. There are a lot of these technologies, but in most of the cases, the successful adoption and scaling of these innovations has been limited because different issues. We have focused in the past a lot on the technological development, So the agronomy, the genetic improvement, what are the varieties, how they work to address climatic stresses or to increase productivity and yield and so on. But then this social aspect in terms of how those different technologies at the end are being adopted by people, by the different social groups, it has been a limited area of work within the centers of the CGIAR. So most scaling efforts of adoption at scale of different technologies have been focused on the diffusion of these technologies, underestimating the role of social capital in how the dynamics of an interaction of the social groups actually are important to adopt the technology, to get into use so that it really addresses the problem. So what is scaling in this context? So scaling is not just the expansion of people using X or Y technology. Scaling is a continuous and dynamic process where innovations or solutions are tailored, adapted, and institutionalized, formally or informally, and knowledge is being empowered so that bottom-up innovation processes emerge. So the idea behind the scaling is not only getting more people to use more technologies, more drought-tolerant varieties of beans, for example, but actually having the possibility to embed the knowledge and those interactions in terms of generating innovations from the local context with local tools so that they are actually address the problem that they want to address. So we have different types of scaling. This is, as in social capital, there are different typologies in terms of scaling. This is the most common one. So scaling out, we are talking about horizontal expansion to new communities. Scaling up, we are talking about integration into policies, into institutions, into governance mechanisms. And then scaling deep, we are shifting cultural norms and social norms. So trying to transform the way things are implemented. So for example, a climate smart agriculture practice, this is some practice that is basically focusing on addressing a climate or weather stress that has been successfully scaled. We can say that it is successful when it is just not just adopted by farmers, by most farmers, but it is also embedded in local institutions, networks, and decision-making structures. So it's not just about the practice itself and how many people is using it, but also how through the implementation and the use of the practice, they are actually generating dynamics in the different structures. So scaling is a systemic change, not just increasing numbers. The idea is to drive change through intentional and contextual scaling strategies. Having first a systemic approach, emphasizing the interconnectivity of the different scaling efforts that are occurring, but also thinking about the innovations themselves, that usually in the CJR, because we are research centers dedicated to agriculture, we are very much focused on technological innovations. But there's a lot of non-technological innovations, social institutional innovations, and so on, that are critical to actually get those technological innovations to make the improvement, the enhancement on the different aspects that we want to address when we're talking about agriculture. Also, contextual understanding, the need for understanding how are the different socioeconomic dynamics in the territory in a specific context to actually understand how scaling should be addressed. And an important part of scaling is the anticipation of consequences. Not every scaling of a variety, for example, in a certain area, will generate only positive effects. They might also have some negative consequences that we need to anticipate before we promote scaling strategies. So this is something that we do not only from the scientific point of view, but also together. The scientific point of view, I refer to the agronomic part and the biophysical aspects, but also we need to anticipate this with the social actors that will be involved and will be somehow affected by the implementation of these scaling strategies. And then what is social capital? I know many of you work in this topic, so I'm just not going to go all over, but we know that social capital has a lot of is a field in which there's a lot of discussions and trying to address and trying to not only conceptualize and define, but also measure how we can actually understand better social capital. For this research in particularly, we are building on the definitions of Wolcock and Putman's, looking at social capital at the social relationships, styles, and norms that foster trust, cooperation, and collective action oriented at achieving a desired set of outcomes. So here we are focusing on how those different aspects are actually oriented towards an outcome, a desired outcome. And the types of social capital, the most common ones are bonding, bridging, and linking social capital. And here is how related to scaling, these different types of social capital are critical in order to address scaling strategies in a tailored way, so that we are truly addressing the problems, not only scaling the innovations just to get more people using it. So, for example, bonding social capital, it's very key in terms of strengthening trust and cooperation, with the close-knit communities. Also, it helps a lot, and this was also supported by a research that I did after this one, that it helps to the early stage adoption of innovations. Because most of the adoption that you do of different technologies, practices, and so on, are voice to voice, farmer to farmer conversation. So it is a very kind of a very early stage of the adoption of different technologies. Bridging social capital connects different communities of networks, of course, and this is key also to enable the scaling, and facilitates peer learning and diffusion of innovations. And linking social capital connects with communities to institutions, policymakers, and external actors, which is also critical, so that we are able to bring to a further stage the scaling processes when we see an innovation or a technology is useful in a certain context. Through policies, through different financial also mechanisms, they can be scaled even more. And also influence resources, access, funding, and policy support for scaling efforts. Some of the aspects that are very important in terms of social capital is the power dynamics that are associated to the exchange of information, of knowledge, of even the technologies and innovations themselves. So those who already have different types of social capital, such as linking, can benefit often the most of this type of technologies or knowledge that is being produced in this context. So that leaves the marginalized groups behind. Then why social capital is essential for scaling? So, as I mentioned, we often focus on diffusion models, focusing on what are the economic or institutional incentives to adopt a certain innovation. But then we don't really understand why those, in some cases, those innovations are not uptaken by the different farmers, even though we say that they're economically valuable, they are addressing a specific challenge, or they are very suitable to increase yield or productivity. But in that process, there's often a neglect of the social relationship that drives the adoption. And that's the key aspect that I want to make emphasis on. We forget in many cases that we are dealing with individuals, that they are the ones that make decisions, and they are part of social groups. And their decision-making process is around those different dynamics that they have in their context. So we really need to understand that when we are trying to develop a technology or non-technological solution in which we want to support some specific challenge that is facing, that the farmers are facing. So social capital in scaling, it enables trust, no? So encourage risk taking, because when you adopt an innovation, most of the times the farmer will take a risk, because the idea of testing one variety that he doesn't know, she doesn't know, will end probably in a risk that he has to take in order to see if that works. Collaboration also strengthens the collective action for scaling initiatives, and also allows to participate in different knowledge sharing networks in which that knowledge and those innovations can actually be shared. And one of the aspects and the challenges that we are seeing is that most scaling models fail to integrate social capital explicitly. They show the importance of having partners, scaling partners, and so on. But it's just a mapping of having the stakeholders to do their part, but not embedding into the social dynamics and social interactions that are in the different contexts. So in this sense, and having this overview, I wanted to know how social capital was considered in the agricultural research for development scaling literature. I wanted to know whether in the literature that we have in terms of scaling in the context of agricultural research for development, social capital was actually explicitly considered, to see if perhaps I was wrong in terms of saying this is not something that we are taking into consideration in this context. So what I did was to do a systematic literature review, a bibliometric analysis. I analyzed a collection of articles of over 2,000 articles, and from those that it is already in a result is that only 13 explicitly discuss social capital. So it was interesting to see that from that collection of articles, explicit use of social capital was very limited. I used a bibliometric analysis, mapping the scaling research trends over time, a factor analysis also in order to identify what were those major knowledge fields from which the scaling research field was built on. So trying to understand the history about and the evolution of scaling research fields, to understand why it includes or not social capital as a key element. And then a content analysis, analyzing specifically those 13 articles and how the social capital was embedded in this collection of articles. So the results, this is the historiograph. The historiograph shows the evolution of the literature that has been produced in a given period of time. So in order to do that, we use different keywords to identify what was the overall collection of articles I wanted to analyze. So we see that from 1982 all the way to 2022, that it has been an increase in evolution, an increase of the topics of the articles that have been published in terms of scaling. And we also found that the research in scaling has many theoretical perspectives. In some cases, this analysis just show a line and then it grows like a tree, in which that is a specific theoretical field. But in this case, you find a lot of different theoretical perspectives. So this topic is being analyzed from different angles. Scaling research is an evolving field that leverages insights from different various disciplines, and looking at how the different evolution of the literature has behaved. So we found 4 interesting streams of work. One related to the linkages between the update of innovation and development goals. So there, the innovation processes and analysis started to link with the development goals. So how to address these global challenges. The second stream of work was related to the importance of local knowledge and farmers. So trying to understand and get a more understanding of the demand rather than the supply side of the innovation processes. And then going more on the stream that is led by Wood Borders is more focused on the scaling per se. No scaling of agricultural innovations, building on the innovation systems field work. So that's an important aspect also to highlight here. And then the fourth stream of work, innovation transformation, grassroots innovations, and the role of multi-stakeholder platforms that are also a key element to the scaling processes. We then did so this is on the bibliometric analysis to see how the evolution of the literature has behaved, and then now we look at the factor analysis. And this factor analysis, the purpose is to understand what are the main clusters, groups, fields of knowledge that the scaling literature and the scaling research field has built on. So we found four main clusters. One is actually the roots of the scaling as a concept, not through the agricultural innovation systems field. Then the second cluster was in terms of the diffusion and adoption of agricultural technologies, productivity enhancement with technology use. That's also it's kind of expected because we are talking about the scale. When we are talking about the scaling, most of the analysis that we hear and the relation that is usually done is through adoption of technologies, know how to do that. Now, the meaning of the scaling, as I mentioned, it goes beyond that, but this is very related in its earlier times of development of the research field. Cluster 3, evaluation of impact of technologies and innovations in agriculture, also because there was all this need for understanding what was the impact at the end of the different technologies, the different practices. And so that relates a lot of why we needed an evolution from diffusion of technologies towards a scaling of innovations and knowledge. And then there we have the cluster 4, where we find more and a better trying to literature around better understanding of the sustainability, environmental sustainability across different scales, not only focused on the farm. So trying to link landscape levels, trying to link how the different innovations and the different interactions between agriculture and environment and so on were important. And this is something also that the scaling research field also addresses in terms of having, as I mentioned, the anticipation of consequences. No, every technology, every innovation that we develop has different consequences that need to be analyzed. So in terms of this, factor analysis, well, we can say that the different building blocks of the scaling literature is explained by the way those different articles are grouped based on the factor analysis. And then we go to a more the content analysis of these 13 articles that we found. That was 1%, less than 1% of the whole collection of articles that I analyzed. And then we wanted to know, okay, so what's the role? Those explicit those articles in which there was explicit consideration of social capital. What do they say? And the summary is that social capital is an enabler of scaling. How? So as scaling is aiming to have a systemic approach, it requires the understanding of social context and interactions to guide effective processes. So the studies places along a strong emphasis on social capital as a key enabler of scale. Also, we found, of course, the limited research that we have on social capital in scaling, But then some of the papers that we analyzed, they focus on market negotiations, no? And resilience rather than explicitly linking the social capital to scaling. So it was kind of a relationship that was in terms of how do I benefit or not, no, in a market transaction itself. So why social capital matters for scaling? So it facilitates resource access, relationship building, and trust among the stakeholders. So it was kind of the highlights that we found. Promotes cooperation, information sharing, and social cohesion, creating also scaling pathways, no, that make sense into a social environment. Shapes also decision-making and power dynamics of social groups, and also social capital in adoption and innovation helps to generate trust, leadership, group cohesion, and that also is so important to really generate the scaling processes of the different innovations and knowledge. Also, the engagement in multiple organizations increases the likelihood of modifying farming practices, because that's a way, you know, the social interaction that it happens and the engagement that happens between different social organizations and the different organizations that are part of a territory, they can also support the different changes that are needed. And the role of trust, norms, and networks influence farmers and stakeholders' willingness to adopt, share knowledge, and collaborate. Actually, share knowledge is one of the proxies that we used after to analyze the willingness to scale. And it was very important because that at least that showed the livelihood of initiating a process of scaling through just the willingness to share their knowledge about the specific practice or technology and so on. And strengthen collective participation in co-developing and scaling of innovations. To just to start closing up, the main discussion and conclusions that we had here in this article was mainly concluding that the scaling is a social process. Even if we want to see scaling as a more agricultural research for development action in terms of the technicality of the innovations, the fact that the course adoption and then there is a willingness to share the knowledge, to share the innovation, and to actually incorporate that into social dynamics and institutionalize is a social process. So it requires a strong social structure and networks that we really need to take into consideration if we want to really address the problems that we are facing. Decision-making in scaling efforts involves individuals and organizations acting independently or collectively. So that's something that is very important to consider. As I mentioned, there's a very limited inclusion, at least explicit, of social capital in the scaling literature. The relationships, trust, power dynamics, knowledge sharing is essential for scaling. There is the need for more research, so we need to see how to increase the research on how social capital can be measured, how social capital can be explicitly included, how would be the strategies, the strategies for scaling, and also the building of social capital within the organizations, within the social environments, and the context that we are aiming to share those innovations are actually needed to be designed and co-designed with different actors. So that's something that is very important. And also studying the specific aspects of social capital, trust, reciprocity, and institutional relationships, how we can use and take advantage of those different aspects, but also support in that process the generation of trust, reciprocity within the different communities that we are working on. For example, focusing specifically on climate change, there's also the case study that I used was on climate change. And there's also a lot to consider when we are talking about climate change interventions, and that's something that is relevant to mention here, because it's part of the agricultural research for development, but then it's not well incorporated social capital in these initiatives as well. And the use of innovation platforms is also key in different processes, also in terms of adopting and scaling innovations. This study was the methodology that was used is quite novel in this area of work, specifically scaling for agricultural research for development. And the idea to use this was to expand a little bit more on that. And then, as I mentioned, new research needed to measure social capital effect, impact on scaling. What is the role of co-creation in participatory innovation models? No, there are specific case studies, but perhaps bringing that to a more in a more systematic way. Policy interventions, how that relates with the different social capital explicit consideration, and also that the scaling strategies should have a very important focus on inclusive scaling models that empower smallholders in their context of social dynamics and strengthen different types of social capital. To achieve effective and responsible scaling of climate-smart agriculture or other types of agricultural research for development innovations, it is essential to integrate social capital into scaling networks, enabling systemic, inclusive, and context-responsive transformation. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Deissy, for that presentation. It's fascinating to, every time you analyze the research, the literature that's out there, and to see what's being published and how people are approaching the different perspectives on these kinds of topics. So we'll take some questions and some discussion. So feel free to either raise your hand, which you'll find under the React button within Zoom, or alternatively, you can post in the chat. If you're not in a position to ask the question yourself, just let me know. I'll be happy to read out the question on your behalf. So perhaps, Deissy, I can start with the first question. It might be difficult to answer, but I think what we often see in the literature is that people use other concepts or other terms other than social capital to investigate something that is effectively equivalent to social capital. I'm sure you didn't look for that specifically, and I'm not sure how you would do it, but did you get a sense for how many other articles other than the 13 may have been touching on themes that are almost equivalent to social capital or very closely related, but didn't use the term?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Thank you, Tristan. So what I did was to look not only for the social capital as such, the term, but also for the keywords on the definition of social capital. So, but it was tricky because, for example, you find relationships, no, and you find in every paper you can find the word relationships. But when I found it, I had to look at, okay, is it relationship explicitly talking about aspects related to social capital, or is it talking about something else? And in those cases, the article was considered. I mean, when they were really focusing on the relationships between farmers or between context A and Y and those kind of things. The same with trust, reciprocity, and I try to have because if I just look at the term, it was kind of two or three articles. Now, so it was but I tried to find more a more broad definition of social capital.
Right. So feel free, anyone else, to jump in if you have other questions and comments. I don't want to dominate this discussion, but I do have more questions in the meantime. But do post in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question. 'Cause I think that's interesting, Deissy. So what you're saying is there was 13 articles in total that included the themes of social capital, but not all of them even necessarily use the term. It seems striking that out of 2,000 odd articles that so few would be investigating those themes of social capital that seem to be so critical to the success of scaling. And so it does seem to be, you know, an area that's quite overlooked within that particular field of research. Is that right?
Yes, yes, because what I was looking for was that it was the treatment that social capital in as a concept was how the term was how the social capital was treated within the research that they were presenting in there. If in many cases, yeah, they talk about gathering stakeholders with consultations, no, or that somehow involving others into the process of the specific research, but it was not the main analysis of those specific articles. So that's why I looked for was social capital a key aspect that you were analyzing in the research, and we found that it was not. And it doesn't. It's like a surprise because that's what I see every day here in the CGIAR in the centers. So they are struggling bringing and scaling the variety, no, this drought tolerant variety of bean. But they don't really understand the context, don't really understand that they, in that population in Nicaragua, for example, they only eat red beans and not black beans. And they do it because they have, and they do eat only those that are in certain size, and they eat it because, I don't know, it's a family tradition and those kind of things. So it's kind of shocking sometimes to see that such an important topic as the social capital, but in general, social dynamics and relationships and the social environment in which these technologies will be used, it's unknown to most of the scientists because they are focused on in the labs, in the field, no, testing the technologies. But it's nice now that the research is expanding on these topics. No, it's not zero, but it's now growing, and we are seeing that, and that's something that we really need to take the lead on as well.
Yeah. And as you said, it's really a social process. But I guess until now, the social part has been left to people who are doing the work to just intuitively do it, to figure out a way to use those social processes to make it effective. And so the research hasn't been interested, at least, not 13 articles, not particularly interested in helping to understand the social parts of that process and how we may be able to improve the scaling through a deeper understanding of those social aspects. And as you said, it really is a social process. So that seems to be a critical part of the equation that needs to be better understood in order to improve scaling. So I guess I'm not sure if this is really a question, but it seems to me that the concept of social capital is ideal as a conceptual tool or a framework for understanding those social aspects of scaling, and to therefore understand how we might be able to intervene to make scaling more effective through an understanding of the social processes. And social capital as a concept seems to be an ideal concept for that. So what do you think the barriers are? Do you think that researchers simply aren't attuned to the need to investigate the social processes, or do you think that the concept of social capital itself maybe is a barrier for some people to adopt because it's complex or something?
Well, when you are talking to biophysical scientists discussing things about social capital or anything to do with social sciences is a little bit difficult also because it's not that tangible, right? They know that they have to go from A to B, no, and doing X and Y, and that's it. So it's a challenge, but I think that it is not necessary that all scientists do everything, but then incorporate new scientists that are specialized in those social aspects, right? So we are we are trying to get there, to get to not only having a brilliant agronomist or climatologist or this biologist in these research organizations, but actually having each time more social scientists that help us to really understand, okay, let's not think about the social processes once I finish my innovation, no? Or the development of technology. Let's think from the start so that from the beginning, I design a technology that is already thinking about where it's going to be placed, who will make the decision of using it, and what do I need to understand first so that use comes through someday, no? Once it is finished. And also involving the people in the process of the actual development. So bringing that expertise is happening. We are thinking more in a systemic approach. We are trying to break that barrier that if it is not simple or linear, it is not feasible to do. So it's a complex process. It's not that tangible at the moment because we need to understand different dimensions, different factors, but we are getting there, bringing that expertise into the agricultural research for development context. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that explanation makes perfect sense to me. That, you know, simply developing a technology, we then need to apply and understand the social side, but these research organizations don't necessarily specialize in that. And so we need more social scientists basically to be involved in that process to help with the scaling side of these technologies. And that isn't something that happens instantaneously. And I guess it requires a shift in the way in which these organizations think about their role in not only developing the technologies, but also in the scaling and the importance of the social aspects in that scaling as well. So I guess that takes time to come about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true.
So there's a question in the chat from Bobby. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question if you like, or I can ask it on your behalf. Perhaps go ahead, Bobby.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So, thank you for the nice presentation. I'd like to ask about these 13 papers that included social capital in the research. Are there any conclusions that said that imply to huge benefits for the scaling in the agriculture, in order to motivate other researchers maybe to include the concept of social capital, because we know that how it is approached, the social capital concept depends on the subject of the other subject of interest. So maybe if there are huge benefits for the scaling, maybe other researchers will apply different approaches in the social capital measurement or variables to get other, conclusions. So
Yeah.
are there any, these huge benefits or with this concept of the scaling? Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things that we found is that so when you are thinking about the scaling, you are not thinking just in the adoption, no, the adoption of a technology, but actually all the benefits that are that will be involved or as an effect of that use of those different technologies or innovation. So having explicit consideration of social capital allows not only the use of that specific technology, but also how those the technology or the innovation that could be actually non-technological as well can actually be institutionalized, for example, formally or informally, can also embed into different decision-making processes in the different context that they are being used, and also enables the development of additional innovations. So having that explicit consideration of social capital allows those processes to happen because you embed into the social dynamics and understand how they behave and what are the key challenges, what are the drivers that allow the different social groups to use or not those types of technologies. And once you understand that, you can actually trigger all different effects of the use of that technology, and that is actually what we mean by scaling. If we don't use social capital explicitly, perhaps you will be able to achieve that someone uses the technology, and they try it, and they could either keep using it or not, but you will never know because it's not something that you have been studied about. So you have not been in touch with the reality of the dynamics, with how those different social groups and communities behave. So you will never know why they start to use the technology, and nothing happened there. So you can check the box saying, okay, yeah, this variety was used for X number of farmers, but then you don't know what happens then next. And that's not the idea when you are trying to actually address those big challenges that we are facing today at the global level in agriculture, especially in the agri-food systems. So this is just an example of the benefits of including social capital explicitly in these processes. And we need research to really also to engage others in doing it as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are some important findings coming out of that research, but perhaps there's still a challenge with communicating that in a way that gets other people's attention, and particularly, I guess, the research organizations and the people who make decisions about research funding and the appointment of researchers. It still seems to be a challenge with social capital of just how we go about effectively communicating, I guess, what it is, but also what it does and why it's important. We know it is, and when we dig into the concept, we understand how what the concept is and how it works. We understand its importance, but it's not necessarily easy to communicate that to people who are so used to thinking about the non-social aspects of what we're talking about. They're focused on the technologies and the processes, but not necessarily thinking about the social processes. And we need more effective ways to be able to communicate that, I think, to help people to understand its importance and therefore to perhaps prioritize both its research and its application.
Yeah, and actually it takes more time, no? The analysis of these kind of processes and what happens after the use of that technology, you require time to really understand what happened and how it influenced X or Y behavior. And in most research projects that we are funded, there is a restriction that we have, no? Both resources and time. So we need to think in a mid and long term perspective in order to achieve and understand these different ways to do research and to actually address these issues, not through social context.
Yeah, so there are some barriers because it is somewhat intangible and the timescales can be longer. Are there any organizations that are pushing and championing for social capital to be used more, to be understood more, and for more research to occur? Like your organization, for example, is there a push for this to be more understood and more researched?
Yeah, actually, we are just in the CIAT, we are in this phase, starting a new phase of programs, of science programs. And one of the programs is on science of scaling for impact. So the idea is that we actually try to take a look at a systemic approach. And in that systemic approach, really understanding on one side the demand of the stakeholders, but a demand that is very focused on listening. What are the key challenges and what are the key barriers, and how can research actually support the passing and addressing those challenges. So that's key, and that's part of social capital as well. In that way, that you recognize, that you listen, that you engage with the different community of actors, that is, you start building trust. Now you start building social capital as well. So that's a way, but also in terms of the research as such, we are also including some variables in terms of social capital to analyze how we are doing the scaling strategies, how we are implementing them, how we are co-designing them, but also assessing the results of those, having some metrics around social capital and trying to reflect on that. Now, what do we need to improve? And we're doing that, through this Scaling for Impact program, and also to the different initiatives that we have attached to that program, because we really want to be a focus so that the research that we develop really make an impact. No, there's a lot of challenges that we need to work towards resolving.
So it really sounds like your organization is taking a lead on this then, and we still need to get past some of the challenges of communicating these ideas. We can say that you can build something, but it doesn't mean people will use it. That's some sort of simple idea that building something also requires people to come in and accept it and want to use it, and it doesn't necessarily happen automatically. So it sounds like you're doing really great work. We still have a little bit more time if anybody else has any other questions. If you do have anything that you'd like to bring up in the form of a question or a comment, make sure you get it in now. If we don't have any more, then we'll look to wrap up the session shortly. So you can either raise your hand or you can post something in the chat if you have anything you'd like to bring up. So Deissy, in terms of a personal reflection, what do you see as the biggest challenges with using the concept of social capital, and what would you like to see changed or improved or fixed about the concept or the way the concept's applied?
Yeah. So the operationalization of the concept is still, we have metrics, right? But those metrics are still very limited to really understand how we as social groups behave, how we make decisions, because it's always very context specific, and that challenges have big programs of research as the ones that we do, because if everything is context specific, there is a challenge of implementing something more systematic. So I think that's a key challenge that we currently have. But at the same time, it's an opportunity. No, it's a very interesting way to be able to research on this and try to find frameworks, that use the concept, that can also try to add to the concept, to really make the concept of social capital more tangible to this kind of research. And I think that's an interesting part for me, actually, kind of having the opportunity to link those different perspectives and try to make more tangible social capital in the day-to-day work that we do as researchers.
Yeah. No, that sounds really great. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions or comments, so let's wrap up the session there. Deissy, thanks so much for taking the time to present your work. It's really fascinating what you're doing, and it's something that's obviously greatly in need, and something that we can all get behind, and hope we can see more social capital research in that space.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thank you. So for everybody, our webinar series is continuing next week. The topic will be negative social capital and requests for resources, a case of small business owners in Uganda. So that'll be an interesting one. And check out our website for more information about our events. And of course, if you're interested in membership in the association as well. So let's end it there. Thanks everyone for taking part. Look forward to seeing you in future.